We're rolling on this, right?
Oh.
Yeah, look, what is it with artists and being able to juggle? You and Drew.
And Amanda.
And
And
a
Amanda.
mannequin? Oh, of course, a mannequin juggle.
Yeah.
That makes more
she can
sense.
juggle. All right, so I'm punchy today. Let's go.
All right, so we've got the Panzer IV in winter camo today, taking a look at another print shop episode here on Brickmania's Designer Studio. This one obviously incorporating a lot more than just extensive prints on the model itself, because this was also quite a groundbreaking custom created element model for us, because as you can see, it is kind of a mix between the Lego elements as well as our own custom created ones, which really kind of defines this build as something that blurs the line between something that's a brick built model versus something that looks a little bit more maybe like a die cast model. But as always on our print shop episodes, I've got Slam joining me to talk a little bit more about these epic builds. Don't worry, if you're watching this before we actually have a Designer Studio episode out, we are going to circle back and get one once Dan is back in the office. The other thing I will say too is that this current kit is sold out and discontinued. However, if you missed out on this one, there are going to be opportunities in the future to get different versions of it. We've been kicking around an Africa Core version, whatnot, so it'll be interesting to see where these custom elements line up in the future Brickmania releases, so stay tuned for more information there. Otherwise, Slam, thank you as always for joining me. Do you have anything just right off the bat that you want to say about this build?
This is really a first for Brickmania, like incorporating this many exterior body panels that are 3D printed parts. So it's a very groundbreaking kit from that standpoint. And also we did extensive UV printing, my specialty. So I did all the camo on this, camoing the 3D printed parts as well as a lot of the visible Lego parts. So it's not a complete camo print job like the previous Panther. But most of what's visible in its complete state is printed.
And so what this is meant to represent is kind of like the base, a previously other colored Panzer that has then been painted with kind of this white paint for wintertime, correct?
Yep, it's a winter whitewashing camo scheme. So every German tank out there, most of them came from the factory already camouflaged. So the camouflage paint is underneath this, and they whitewash it with a lime wash or a calcium wash. And over the course of the winter, that starts to
wear off,
fall off, wear off, wash off, and by springtime, it's pretty much gone. So
it's a smart way to do it.
For people like me that love weathering stuff, this is the dream camouflage. This is what I want to do because it's these layers of color, and then grime and the whitewash, like all mixing together. And I tried very, very hard to represent that here, where you can see spots of color, like the greens and the browns and the tans popping through the whitewashing. And we used a base, our Lego is just light gray, which is somewhere in the range of a winter camo.
Absolutely it is.
So the things that are not printed still look like they could be whitewashed if you blur your eyes.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, and obviously you've got a lot of experience, clearly, in UV printing on Lego elements, but this is kind of a different level of bringing in the custom created elements when it comes to printing. Obviously, we've done some custom printing on 3D elements in the past, but this is kind of that next level. What were some of the challenges to make sure that your artwork on the 3D elements looked, similar or matched with the Lego elements themselves?
So, I mean, first challenge is that I was designing art for this while the 3D printed parts were being designed.
Sure.
So there was a bunch of back and forth with camera guy as he's designing things, and he's also working with Dan, the kit builder, to say, is this the right size? It's the right scale. So we're sending screenshots back and forth, and like trying to get scales and dimensions of things. But with UV printing, it's really important to know exactly how big something is, because I'm working within like very, very small tolerances, tenths of a millimeter. Of tolerance, so knowing exactly how big something is super important to me. And when we're 3D printing our own stuff, at least we know, because we built those in CAD, so we have accurate measurements. But that's when it's done.
Right.
But then I've talked about this before. Our UV printers like to print on flat things, and they have a very short range of where the ink is more or less in focus as it's hitting the substrate. So having pieces like this big curve along the back of the tank, I mean, that's
presents a lot of challenges even
That's
when
a
it's
lot
in
of
chunks.
challenges.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
So the art that I worked up on these big curves, we had to split them. I broke the seam up so it's not such an obvious seam, and we can do that in multiple pieces. And so that's challenging again.
I bet.
Getting the art, like I know how big this three-dimensional part is, but where the ink falls is a different measurement, a different dimension than otherwise. So anyways, it's challenging, yes. But it's fun to work back and forth in real time with the guy making the part and saying, this looks great, I can work with this, and so on and so forth. Camera guy, of course, does great work. Really, really good work.
So see, now you're trying to get him to make sure he edits this whole thing favorably.
Please, be nice to me. Make me look good. Hey, can you make me look better?
So when you're looking at the 3D printed elements, obviously something like this. So how many refinements are we talking about? I mean, obviously it's quite a long process, but also not that long because we release these kits, so rapid fire. How many prototypes would you say you guys had to go through before you got something where you're like, all right, this looks right, this fits on the model, and it works with the UV print department?
I want to say it was like 3 or 4.
Okay, sure.
Perhaps. I remember seeing early versions. I remember making suggestions about this part and if we could have 2 stud holes instead of 1, and that way I can hold it inside the UV printer,
Sure.
like solidly. That's a huge, huge thing for us to take.
Yeah, because
down
if
as-
anything shifts, then it's kaput pretty much.
Yep, you have to be able to hold things precisely, to print them precisely. So there's a bunch of back and forth. So I want to say 3 or 4.
Wow.
And I was taking the prototypes and running them through the UV printer to see if my prints would work in real time also. So it's a very conversational process. It was great.
So obviously the turret, the curve is challenging, but it's solid still. These side skirts and everything else, they're full of holes. It's that mesh. So is that then another layer of like, my goodness, how do we make sure this thing isn't sitting maybe in a pool of ink or whatever? How did that come about?
We've never printed on meshes of this scale before, and inside the printer, we did end up with quite a bit of a mess.
Yeah, I bet.
And we laid down quite a bit of packing of blue tape, painter's tape, to try and protect our
Literally
our
painter's tape.
jigs
How
and
about
whatnot.
that?
Yep. So lots of painter's tape down below them, and I know we've still accumulated a lot of grid print on some of our base plates inside the printer. So ink buildup is the thing that happens over time, and those parts, even when we're just doing normal printing, we have ink floating around to some extent, and eventually things get too gummed up to work anymore, so move on to the next jig. But so having a grill wasn't the worst thing in the world, especially with this kind of a camo where doesn't need to be super precise. It's mostly just grime and the whitewashing. It worked out pretty darn well, and the misting ink wasn't the end of the world.
Yeah, okay. So for a camo, we'll call it a camo scheme or whatever, something like this. Obviously, you've probably got a mind of how you want it to look, but like you said, it's not exactly cohesive, so you don't necessarily need to worry about like parts integrating with each other. How do you even kind of like begin this artwork?
The exact same way that I began the last one, where I laid out all the printed surfaces in essentially a paper map. I talked about turning it into a papercraft model. Even with this one, I still had that topographical, flattened out, here are all the surfaces. And in my art, I did make a cohesive ambush camo scheme underneath all of this.
Sure, okay.
And then from there, took it into Photoshop and did the whitewashing on top of it.
Okay. So it almost like went through the same history of a real tank, but just on your computer.
Correct, yes. Yep.
Very cool.
You need to reveal some color, break out the eraser. Right?
Okay. Wow, so underneath this entire thing, there is actually a camo scheme, so to speak, but it has been quite literally and digitally covered up for winter camouflage. That's really, really cool.
Camo on top of camo, yep. And occasionally you can see some ambush camo dots. They poke through. So, and this is one of the first kits I've run through Photoshop as my art tool.
Okay.
I don't know how many people watching are familiar with the Adobe Creative Suite tools,
Right.
but that's I use 99% Illustrator. Everything we do is Illustrator, vector shapes. Even my other camouflages have been vector shaped and created that way. So this one, it reads quite a bit more detailed because of the paint work that's happening in Illustrator or in
Interesting.
Photoshop.
Okay. More photorealistic, quite literally.
It's very much a painter's tool, yep, versus a illustrator's tool.
Yeah, okay.
If that makes sense. So that was quite a bit challenging. I had to figure out workflows for getting those files into our print service system and into the instructions. Like, that was also a huge challenge.
Yeah, I bet.
And actually led to some nice changes for how we do printed parts in instructions. That's
Okay.
made things quite a bit faster. So we learned some good things there.
And you see a lot of that with these really print and 3D intensive models, in the sense that they kind of set their own precedent on, like, all right, well, we did that this way. We learned that we may want to do it this way in the future. And so kind of when you circle back for a V2 or a different version in the future, you've got a little bit of something in your playbook, so to speak.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm excited to do more versions of this exact tank because most of the difficult work of laying out the printed parts is already done. So the next time around should be a lot faster.
A little something you
a bit
can,
easier.
you can reference to, so to speak. You want to go through some of the details too? Is obviously we've talked a lot about the camo and whatnot, but there's always some hatches and stuff going on here as well.
Yep, there are some vehicle details. We've got the front drivers, hatches, which are standard Illustrator work on top of the camouflage. The top of the tank has got the commander's hatch ring is printed, aside from where the hinge hooks up in Lego form. A couple of hatches there too. Our standard Balkenkreuz on both sides, and the number 222, which I think I went with because of 2022. It was
Oh, fair enough.
I think it was the last kit.
I thought maybe it was the source
of
material, but
2022.
yeah, okay.
Because we were working on this at the very end of December. Yeah. So that's where I chose that number. But it is in line with how the Germans numbered their tanks. And the viewport on the very front is that
The gold bar, yeah.
The Lego ingot. Yeah. So not a ton of details, but just enough to make things pop. I also like the bustle box. It's got
Yeah.
some hinges, which are very fine lines, and I think those worked really great. So overall, a super cool little kit.
Yeah, and despite its weathered look, or the intent there, it is really crisp and clean too, so to speak.
I think so, yeah. And unlike our other camouflages, this one shouldn't result in too much of... we didn't provide these pieces on base plates.
Right.
With the puzzle.
You're building this out of a bag.
You're building this one out of bag, and it shouldn't be too particular about how you place the pieces. There is a way that they were painted, so they work cohesively, but if you don't want to spend all the time trying to figure that out, they should work almost anywhere.
You just got to sit and watch this video over and over and over again until it looks like Slam meant it to look.
Right. Camera guy put these ones on, and I think he did a good job, and I don't know if they're correct or not.
Well, there you go.
I can't
You
tell.
wouldn't know anyways. That works totally fine too.
Yeah.
Excellent. How about the minifigure? We want to go over him real quick?
He's a fairly standard Panzer commander. I believe this was Amanda,
Yeah?
I think, possibly designed this one, but we've done a ton of Panzer commanders over the years, so.
Yes, they do tend to blend together a little bit.
They
But this
do.
one clearly late war with the white pants and that
And the
camouflage.
splinter camo. Nice details on him. He's got like his radio gear, and love the 3D printed headset and cap that's also been UV printed. That's a really, really nice detail on him. But it's a great looking minifig, and you could also add crewmen, I believe.
Yeah, same ones that we had for the Panther one. Which, if you haven't seen that episode, we do go over that crewman on the Bafil Panther episode as well. So make sure to check that out if you want to see some additional minifig artwork. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, every tank needs a crew, right?
Absolutely.
Commander's not going to get very far on his own. Can you imagine if War Daddy was alone? That movie would have been like 10 minutes long.
Do you think that standard commanders could drive the tank?
I don't know.
Could they do the jobs that they were like?
Well, I know
they
in
had people for?
tank school for the Americans, at least, there was a lot of cross training because, people
would
die in
think.
war. And so you
Right.
need to be able to know how to do all your jobs. I don't know anything about German tank school, but considering how pioneers they were when it came to armor, I mean, I'd think that there's probably some tank school of their own version there where they do learn some of that. But here we are speculating. Okay. You can let us know in the comments if you know a lot about World War II German tank school. But Yeah.
This minifigure can drive and fire the tank.
There you go.
There you go.
There.
Yep.
From the man himself.
There you go.
There's no debate anymore.
Okay.
So cool. Well, very
Okay.
very cool. Nice crisp model. And like I said, if you missed out on this this initial one, you will get some chances in the future for alternate variations. And if you did pick up this one, pay attention because you'll have quite a collection on your hands by the time this is all said and done. And you know, just like we did last week, this is one heck of a premium build, and we continue to push the envelope there, which is always really cool to see. Awesome. Well, Slam, as always, thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me again.
Cool. And thank you, as always, for watching.